Ian Thomas Ramsey was Professor of the Philosophy of Religion at the University of Oxford, and Bishop of Durham from 1966 until his death in 1972. He wrote extensively on the problem of religious language, Christian ethics, the relationship between science and religion, and Christian apologetics. As a result, he became convinced that a permanent centre was needed for inquiry into these interdisciplinary areas, and in 1985 the Ian Ramsey Centre for Science and Religion at the University of Oxford was set up to promote discussion on the problems raised for theology and ethics by developments in science, technology and medicine. Early life and education. Ramsey was born in Kearsley, near Bolton, Lancashire, an area noted for small industries and factories. He was the sole child born to Arthur and Mary Ramsey, and was raised by them in the Christian faith. He attended primary school at St. John's Church in Farnworth, Bolton, and then proceeded on a scholarship to Farnworth Grammar School, where he studied Latin, mathematics, physics and chemistry. He won a scholarship that enabled him to study at Cambridge University in the 1930s and graduated with an MA in 1940. At Cambridge, he was influenced by Charles E. Raven and A.C. Ewing. Raven spurred Ramsey's interests in the relationship between science and religion, while Ewing guided him into studying metaphysics. After graduating from Cambridge, Ramsey then enrolled as candidate for ordination in the Church of England at Ripon Hall, near Oxford, and began his theological studies there. During his studies he served as an assistant curate at Headington Quarry, and it was there that he met his wife Margaretta Mackay. In 1943, upon completing his theological degree and ordination, Ramsey then took on the role of chaplain at Christ's College, Cambridge. He was elected as a Fellow and Director of Studies in Theology and Moral Science in 1944. It was also in 1944 that he was appointed as University Lecturer in Divinity and Canon Theologian at Leicester Cathedral. He held the latter role alongside his main posts until 1966, when he was elected the Bishop of Durham. His first doctorate was an honorary doctorate of divinity from Oxford, awarded in 1966. Career. Alongside of his role as a chaplain, Ramsey became widely known at Cambridge in the 1940s for his lectures in philosophical theology. In 1951 he accepted the chair of Knowleth Professor of the Philosophy of the Christian Religion at Oxford University. His inaugural lecture was delivered on the 7th of December 1951 and published as Miracles, an exercise in logical map work. He served as a Fellow of Oriel College at Oxford and as Chairman of the Faculty of Theology. During his tenure at Oxford, Ramsey was invited to deliver various guest lecture series, including the Forward Lectures at the University of Liverpool, Annual Theological Lecture at Queen's University, Belfast, the Frederick Dennis and Morris Lectures at King's College, London University, Witten Lecturer at McMaster University in Canada, Riddle Memorial Lecture at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne, and the Zenos Lectures at McCormick Theological Seminary, Chicago. Most of these lecture series were subsequently published as books: Freedom and Immortality, Religion and Science, On Being Sure in Religion, Models and Mystery, and Christian Discourse. Ramsey was an authority on the Christian apologetics work of both Joseph Butler and of John Locke. He wrote a study of Butler's life and apologetic arguments that was published in 1969. Ramsey also wrote a critical introduction to an abridged edition of Locke's The Reasonableness of Christianity that was released in 1958. Both Locke's and Butler's texts were critical apologetic works that addressed the religious skepticism held by various deist thinkers in the late 17th century and 18th century, as well as his duties as a college administrator and lecturer. Ramsey was also very active as a churchman. He served as the examining chaplain to the bishops of Portsmouth, Sheffield and Norwich, and acted as the director of the Lambeth Diploma in Theology designed for non-clergy students interested in theology. He also served on various Church of England commissions inquiring into ethical questions about birth control, suicide, and on the subject of divine healing. He read reports dealing with those topics for the Church's Board for Social Responsibility. On the 15th of December 1966, he was installed at Durham Cathedral as the 90th Bishop of Durham. His enthronement was commented on as unusual since the cathedral doors were open to welcome him. He became chairman of the BBC Central Religious Advisory Committee in 1970. At Easter in 1972, he had a heart attack and died on 6 October 1972, after having a meeting at Broadcasting House, London with CRAC. Theological contributions. Ramsey approached a number of philosophical problems concerning 20th-century theology. One of the significant topics concerned God talk, or the soundness of theological language. Much of this had been prompted by the philosophical writings of Ludwig Wittgenstein and also by philosophers such as Alfred A. who were involved in the mid-20th century movement known as logical positivism. The implications of As' argument in language, truth and logic were that religious or theological language was deemed to be analytically unscientific. Religious statements were considered to be technically meaningless, as it was argued that claims such as God exists were observationally unverifiable. Ramsey was concerned in his writings to argue that traditional theological language was empirically meaningful. He was equipped to make this argument because his thinking closely paralleled that of Wittgenstein. Theology grounded in mystery. For Ramsey, theological language is grounded in permanent mystery. Quote, he distinguishes this permanent mystery from the kind of mystery that can be solved by facts and information. Permanent mystery cannot be eradicated. It is not mystery, used as a synonym for ignorance. In his emphasis on mystery, Ramsey drew on Ludwig Wittgenstein. For example, Ramsey distinguished between the thatness and the whatness of an event. This distinction parallels Wittgenstein's proposition, not how the world is the mystical, but that it is. Quote, the mystery of what happens can be solved by sufficient information, but, for Ramsey, the mystery that it happens is permanent. Given his position that theology is grounded in permanent mystery, Ramsey holds that language about God should never be viewed as a superscience that explains phenomena. Rather than treating language about God as explanatory, Ramsey characterizes talk about God as an attempt to be articulate about the divine mystery. Two languages. In his religious language, Ramsey differentiates two kinds of language. He denotes one kind variously as observational language, ordinary language, straightforward language, or straightforward public language. Quote, to simplify, this first kind of language can be called ordinary language. Ramsey calls the other kind of language religious language, the language of theology. He cautions that religious language will be logically odd because God pulls a word outside ordinary language. Quote, thus, even though religious language is grammatically simple, its logical structure is neither plain nor straightforward. The challenge for religious language, in Ramsey's estimation, is how to make ordinary language into a suitable currency for the religious language of theology without its being misread as straightforward language. Ramsey tried to prevent misreading religious language as ordinary language by pointing up the logically odd qualifiers to the ordinary. language of disclosure models, by which religious language speaks of God. One of Ramsey's examples is the disclosure model first cause. Quote, when God is predicated by active verbs. If the language were ordinary language, the word God would refer to a causal agent. But, for Ramsey, the disclosure model first cause does not mean that God is a causal agent. Rather, if one traces the empirical whatness of a causal chain, the permanent mystery that such causation exists might dawn on a person. Or in an image Ramsey used the penny drops. Quote, disclosure models are grounded on the empirical what, in this example, causation. This is the empirical fit, Ramsey emphasized. At the same time, disclosure models point to mystery, in this example, the mystery that causation exists. Thus, for Ramsey, the religious language of theology names the permanent mystery God, and by a disclosure model speaks of God as first cause. Quote, the qualifiers first and the capitalizations signify religious language. Ramsey's understanding of theological language has been applied to the biblical story of Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 1 verses 2 to 5, 19. The disclosure situation was that Hannah had no children because of unstated empirical causes, but the permanent mystery that the causes happened was named the Lord, and was modeled with an empirical fit as having closed Hannah's womb. Quote, when Hannah became pregnant, the mystery that it happened was again named the Lord. Quote, this time the Lord was modeled with an empirical fit as having remembered Hannah to fit the new disclosure situation. Ramsey reconciled such conflicting disclosure models by tracing them back to the what of the disclosure situations. Grounded in personal experience, Ramsey's arguments were developed on a model of religious language grounded in personal experience and personal disclosure. As humans communicate with each other, personal disclosure occurs. Ramsey used this point to argue that humans come to encounter God also by way of personal disclosure, thus offering an argument from analogy. Ramsey's theological work thus re-emphasized the traditional theological view that all religious language is analogical, and the religious words that humans create are always involving the language of analogy. He was particularly effective in communicating with experts from a wide range of disciplines, inspiring them to work together on the problems raised for theology and ethics by developments in science, technology and medicine. As a result of his experience, he became convinced that a permanent center was needed for inquiry into these interdisciplinary areas, and it was in response to this that the Ian Ramsey Centre for the Study of Religious Beliefs in Relation to the Sciences and Medicine was set up in 1985 in the University of Oxford. Bishop Ian Ramsey Primary School in Consett, County Durham. Ian Ramsey Church of England Comprehensive School in Fairfield, Stockton-on-Tees, and Bishop Ramsey Church of England Secondary School in Ruislip in the London Borough of Hillingdon are also named after him. Styles and titles: 1940 to 1944, the Reverend Ian Ramsey. 1944 to 1966, the Reverend Canon Ian Ramsey. 1951 to 1966, the Reverend Professor Ian Ramsey. 1966 to 1972, the Right Reverend Dr. Ian Ramsey ***. As a bishop, Ramsey is routinely referred to as Dr. Ramsey, despite holding only an honorary doctorate. Bibliography: Biology and Personality, Frontier Problems in Science, Philosophy and Religion. Christian Discourse, Some Logical Explorations, Christian Empiricism, ISBN 0859690113, ISBN 0802815588. Christian Ethics and Contemporary Philosophy. Freedom and Immortality. Joseph Butler 1692–1752, author of The Analogy of Religion. Some features of his life and thought. Models and mystery, miracles, an exercise in logical map work. Models for divine activity, on being sure in religion. Our understanding of prayer, personality and science. ISBN 0-7001-540-X. Prospect for metaphysics, religion and science, conflict and synthesis. Religious language, an empirical placing of theological phrases. The Improbable Bishop, Ian Ramsey of Durham. ISBN 978184104-511-5. Words About God. ISBN 0-334013836. Edited, John Locke. The Reasonableness of Christianity. Contributor, Collier's Encyclopedia.